Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, I see Mr. Walker joining. I was just about to text him.
Morning, Tyrone.
Thank you. I've been saying it 3 or 4 times, like, okay, right. Give me a second to get the naming updated here. And as I didn't log in as myself, I'm at work, so using our colleagues. Okay. Okay.
Just sent Ms. Escribano a message, and I know our chair, Mr. Rigor, is traveling, so he may or may not be able to join.
All right, well, we'll give it a minute and then we'll go,
Okay.
Christina, do we have, or I guess, Paul, I could ask you this too. Do we have anyone presenting for community schools?
I believe we should. I believe Chief Black Burke will be on.
Okay,
Christina, do you know?
Yeah, and she should be. Let me send her a message.
thank you.
And I see Dr. Schmerling joined.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
All right, well, I'm thinking we're gonna start at 8:35 regardless. I appreciate Natalie being on and being on time. So I want to acknowledge that and thank you.
This may be another thing that Christina may have messed up on. I don't believe I sent Cabinet the invite, so let me forward. Oh, sorry, my apologies to everyone and everyone watching on YouTube. I don't believe I see them on here. So I'm just gonna forward them because they know they normally have it as they know they need to attend if they have any contracts on.
Is anyone from cabinet expected
Just
to do the attuned? Anyone
That
from?
was me.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was you. Okay, all right. So, okay, well, it's 8:35. I would like to go ahead and bring the meeting to order. And my name is Kim Oliver. I am the chair of the Finance and Audit Committee. Good morning. Thank you for joining us here at Hartford Public Schools. With me this morning, in terms of our board members, we have Tyrone Walker on the line, as well as Jim Schmerling on the line as well. We may have some others who join us as we continue through the meeting, but for now, that's where we are. On our agenda today, we have two contracts that are being requested to be pushed through to the regular meeting, as well as a report, our preliminary 2022-23 results. Christina, I know that we had not yet confirmed the process of public comment, but what we will do, and I may have to, if we get to a certain place, I'll ask if anyone has requested to do public comment or to send something to you. And when we get to the end of the meeting, just open that up for that possibility. Apologize that that process has not been sent out earlier. We did talk about being up to the chair to allow for public comment, but we did not yet settle as a board on the actual process. So my apologies to the public and everyone else on the call, but I did want to acknowledge that and give that as an opportunity. So Christina, is there a way for you to see either through YouTube or some other way if anyone has public comment?
I can check the YouTube channel, but also feel free to give my email, csantiago@hartfordschools.org. It's probably the best. I'll monitor my email. So that's CSANTIAGO@hartfordschools.org. Let me just change my.
Okay. Thank you, Christina. And so what we'll do again is if someone does have a public comment for today, if you go ahead and send something written, preferably to Christina's email, then she'll be able to read them. And what I'll do is if we do have public comment is to my board colleagues, we'll ask to update the agenda to add public comment to it. And as I said, hopefully next month, we'll have the process down packed and ready to go. So with that, we're going to go to our first agenda item for today, 1.01 contract approval for Attuned. And with that, Paul Foster, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. And thank you to Natalie Gordon, who's here from Attuned. Thanks, Natalie, for being here. So this contract did get presented to the Teaching and Learning Committee at the meeting earlier this month. Excuse me. And so we have a couple slides or this slide really to give you a quick highlight of the financials associated with the contract. And so I do want to give a little bit of voiceover to the purpose of the contract, and you see the objectives here. We really have two pieces of work that are happening under this contract. One is around building the capacity of the Office of School Leadership. As you know, we have a new Chief of Schools and Innovation in Chief Barney, and supporting in both in that transition, but also building out, further building out, I should say, our processes, systems, and practices for principal supervision within the Office of School Leadership. So that's one part of the work that we want to bring Attuned on for. And the other part is working in parallel, working on innovating in our central office. So thinking differently about how central office supports schools, and thinking about, particularly as we've embraced and embarked, I should say, on our innovation network with 5 of our schools, right? We can't ask our schools to innovate in kind of how they do school if we're not thinking about how we innovate and how we support schools from the central office. And so part of the reason, and we did share this with the Teaching and Learning Committee, that we are proposing a partnership with Attuned on these two buckets of work is I really think of them, Attuned, as you I think know, are already supporting the innovation network work. Now that's money, that is not a contract that came to you because actually the Barr Foundation is paying for that chunk of this work directly. So they're actually funding Attuned to work with us on the innovation network. But I really think of these three pieces of work as 3 parts of a coherent whole, which is supporting schools to innovate in how we deliver school, supporting central office innovate and how central office supports schools in that innovation work. And then the Office of School Leadership is really the bridge, right? Our Office of School Leadership as the office charged with supervising school leaders and schools is really the bridge between central office and school. So I think there's a lot of value in having that coherent connection between all three pieces of this work. So as you can see on the slides, just speaking to the financials, this is a $439,200 contract. You can see the larger chunk of that is for the support of the Office of School Leadership. Slightly smaller chunk of that work is for Central Office Innovation. The funding structure is a little bit different. So the majority of this is coming from our ESSER 3 ARP funding. And I would say, you know, this is part of, from an alignment standpoint, this is about our strategic priority around skillful staff and effective operations. And, you know, as we've talked about, you know, when we talked about our ESSER spending plan for the 23-24 school year, we're really focused, because that's short-term money, on what are ways we can build capacity. And so the strategy here is to make an investment that is building capacity in central office and in our Office of School Leadership that will be sustained and valuable to us long after the partnership with Attune is over. So in terms of the funding stream, again, $239,200 is coming from ESSER. We have another grant that we received from the Barr Foundation supporting the district's innovation work. We're going to use $100,000 of that grant from the Barr Foundation in support of this contract. And lastly, there's $100,000 that was budgeted and approved in what's called the ARPA Priority School Districts and Faith Acts grant. So I will say, just because this is the Finance Committee, in Teaching and Learning, we had a specific question about the Faith Acts grant. And so you can see there's a footnote we've added to this slide, and I can speak to it a little bit, but this is what we heard back from CSE. And so it did cause some confusion in the Teaching and Learning Committee that this was one of the funding streams for this contract. But the reality is the Faith Acts grant naming is a function of who sponsored and supported the legislation to be passed and worked to get the funding. But the funding stream itself does not have to do with religion. So just want to clarify that. And actually, it follows the same spending guidance as we are directed to follow by CSDE for the Priority School District grant. And in the footnote, that part I put in quotes, that's a quote from our person at CSDE. So I just want to be upfront about, because that was a question that was asked. That's the story with that particular funding stream. So it has really the same kind of funding guidance as some of the other ARPA funding that we've been allocating. So I think that's really the financial backstory, but I'm happy to take any questions. And I know Natalie is here as well, if there's any questions specific to Attune.
Thank you, Paul. I see a hand raised. Mr. Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Paul, what's presented here it's not enough detail. I think while it's not digging deep into finance piece, but it's the general sense that it's almost $500,000 for proving it for county central office. I think my expectation is that there'd be a detailed project plan here, really detailing out how dollar per dollar, how this is really going to be spent. And I'm saying in this context, Paul, that central office is already large. I think for me, as a board member, there are roles within central office whose tasks I don't know explicitly. So one of the things I kind of want adjuncted this to me, it feels like in actual central office, we should have staff, like for our Office of School Leadership, that actually could do data analysis, take directives for innovation and figure out plans, what needs to be done, what needs to be implemented. And so to kind of say here that we need to spend over $500,000 to build capacity, it begs like, okay, what is the skill set we actually don't have? You know, for all that staff, what skills don't we have? And then which staff are we trying to build some skills up so they can actually better serve the district in the execution of its mission? Right now, I can't see this. I can't say it to anybody. And so what this is going to look like to people is a spend that's, I'm going on a tiny bit, but I'm really coming at, we need to stop the practice of throwing out $500,000, couple bullets, not a real crisp idea of how life is actually going to get better, because this money is not going to hit a child per se. So I think we need a real strong tie as to details, capacity build. Here's what we're going to learn and be able to do tomorrow that we can't do today, that somehow it's going to make parents and schools' life directly better. Mm-hmm. Can you come up with that kind of project plan? That's what I'm really asking. And is there a turn time that we can actually get that kind of detail?
Mr. Foster.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that point. And I will say there was certainly more detail when we shared in the Teaching and Learning Committee, right? Because that was the context where we shared the sort of detail about what the work is under this contract. And we do also have a detailed scope of work from Attuned. And I think I can work with Christina and we can absolutely share the detailed scope of work that goes into that. In terms of your specific questions about the purpose of this and the skill sets, what I would say is this is, as I had said, it's about capacity building. We have a new chief of schools. We have a new EDSL as well in that office. And I think there's an opportunity to, this is about, it's not about a particular skill or not skill, it's about systems and practices. And so I think there is always a value, particularly, and this is short-term, right? We have short-term funding and it's a short-term project. And there is value in having somebody from outside come in and take a look, right? Because they don't have the same history and they don't have the same, well, this is how we've always done it kind of perspective from being in the same district for a period of time. And so I think there's value in somebody coming from the outside and being able to say, you know, here's some things we see in other urban districts as systems practices that have been successful in supporting principal supervisors to do their work of supporting, coaching, and supervising principals, right? That's on the Office of School Leadership side. And same on the central office side, right? There is value in an external perspective that where people are bringing their expertise and best practices from other places. And that's really what this is about, both on the Office of School Leadership side and the central office side. And the last thing I would say is, you know, I appreciate your point about certainly these are not dollars that are directly funneled into a classroom to support student learning. However, I wouldn't agree that these are not impacting students, right? Central office has a distinct function of supporting the success of schools, and that can go either way, right? So central offices sometimes, and I'm not ascribing this to Hartford by any means, but central offices can be a support, but there are also ways that central offices can sometimes create barriers to the work that needs to happen in schools. And so reviewing and thinking about how we can better improve and support the ways in which we support schools, there is a value in that. And there is value for students and families in that work.
Mr. Walker, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. So one is, Paul, I agree that in the role of central office and what it can play. I'm asking that the plan make a real clear line to show. That's all. Now, the other piece that you mentioned, I'm going to bring up once, I'm going to bring up again in the meeting today, is the substantive value of this was presented in another committee. And so I'm also going to toss out my challenge point that maybe some of this doesn't need to be really talked about here in the financial and audit committee, because the substance of this is not really a financial issue. There's some financial discussions we need to have about spend and things like that. But to really get at this, probably, you're right, it's done at another committee. So my statement here is I'm beginning to going to work with my colleagues to see if we can reshape finance committee to really get at the financial decision that the district is making, and maybe not so much this, where, as you said, the details and values, where teaching and learning, and that's where probably, so I'm not going to make us re-litigate that again, but understand, as you're presenting, as a finance person, I can't see much for me to add to this, because just these numbers on the board, I can't necessarily make you get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I'm not really making a value added effort here. What I'm seeing here, and I'll say it, I get it, because it's more than $50,000. The board has to approve it. We're not approving it here, you know, and so I'm going to often just say that potentially these types of things maybe just go to full board, and we have more focus here in the finance committee in dealing with the financial decisions, like how we're spending ARPA and ESSA dollars and whether that makes the best sense for us.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Dr. Schmerling.
Thank you. You know, in my field, we tend to use a lot of jargon that neither our board or other constituents quite understand. So it takes a really concerted effort to bring these kinds of things into layman's terms. And I think that's sort of what we need to do here. When we talk about capacity building, I'm not clear what that means. And I think in terms of Mr. Walker's recommendation, I agree. And I think understanding, because there is great value in having a strong administrative function. I mean, I can appreciate that. But when we talk about a value add, it is this capacity addition, but I don't understand what that capacity means. So I think, and value is an economic term. So when finance is an audit committee is looking at this, we need to understand not only the dollars spent, but what's the return, and the return is building capacity. So it's really important that we define that in layman terms so that all of us understand the true need and the value and the wisdom of approving the funding. Thank you.
Mr. Foster, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think certainly, absolutely, and 100% agree. And as I shared, I'm happy for us to share the full scope of work, which gives more detail in terms of what is the specific work that Attune will be taking on. And I don't know, Chair Oliver, if you want, certainly I'd be happy to hand it over to Natalie to give a quick overview of what is in this scope of work relative to the capacity building that I'm talking about, because I appreciate the point about the jargon and about that. Capacity building could mean lots of things. I don't know if that's Chair Aller, if you want to use some time for that, or.
Well, let's do this. I want to check Dr. Schmerling, see if he has a follow-up, and then I'll go to Ms. Brody first, and then we can do that. Dr. Schmerling, do you have a follow-up? Your hand's still up.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brody.
Good morning, everyone. So I was in the committee meeting and I left there kind of not clear myself. I had a funding question, but moreover, when we can't, everything, I'm just thinking everything that we do, especially if we're almost spending $500,000, right? It should be clear to board members how this affects our bottom line, though, children doing better. We shouldn't have to question how that looks or how that's going to work out. That should be crystal clear. That should never be misunderstood. And I think that's a lot of, at least my frustration, is we have to filter through all of those things to say, how does this affect children? That it should be presented in that way. That should be the baseline of everything presented to us. This how it will make children benefit. We shouldn't have to imagine that and figure that part out. So I don't know, I came on late, I apologize. I don't know if I had questions about the Faith Acts portion, because what I thought I knew Faith Acts to be, I'm trying to understand how it gets assigned to this funding. Not to this funding, how that funding gets assigned to this work.
So Mr. Foster did mention that. I'll give it back to him to answer that question directly. And then I think we should go back to just, again, help to crystallize that direct line and tie to how this benefits children. But Mr. Foster, if you could just speak to the Faith Act first, please.
Yeah, so the Faith Acts, it's an interesting name for this funding stream, the Priority Schools and Faith Acts grant. So I did add a footnote to this slide. And it's really a function, and this is the reason that's in quotes on the slide, is this is a quote from the CSDE. It's called that because of who supported and sponsored the passage of the legislation, but actually it doesn't have any particular association with religion. It actually follows the exact same spending guidance as the Priority School District grant that we receive. And so this was included in that Priority Schools and Faith Acts grant narrative and application because it was consistent with the funding guidance from the Priority School District grant. So the name, I realize the name is a little unusual, but this is from the CSDE in terms of the reason it's got that in the naming is around who sponsored and supported the legislation.
Any follow-up to that, Ms. Brody, before we do the link directly to children?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Foster, and then also if you want to bring in Ms. Gordon to speak to how our children will be better off as a result of this contract. That would be helpful.
Sure, I can start and then happy to bring in Natalie. I mean, I think, and we did in the slide deck that we shared at Teaching and Learning, and certainly in the scope of work, Attuned has been very explicit about naming deliverables and measures of success. And we included some of that information in the slide deck from the Teaching and Learning Committee. But before I hand it over to Natalie, I do want to say, it's just honest to say that there is not a straight line from funding that supports the increasing capacity of district leadership or school leadership or central office and, for example, student test scores, right? However, we are a large and complex organization with 4,000 and more employees serving a large number of students and families. And the line I would draw between outcomes for students is if we are not a high functioning organization, we will not serve students well. And so capacity building like this, I'll let Natalie go into more detail on what this is. The direct line to student outcomes and student test scores come in the fact that this kind of contract is supporting us to become a higher functioning organization, which does have a direct translation to student achievement, our engagement with families, and really all of the areas you see in our district model for excellence. But Natalie, if you want to just give a quick, a little more specifics on the scope within the Office of School Leadership Support and Central Office Support and how you see that as related to outcomes for young people.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And thank you all for allowing me to visit the meeting this morning. Really appreciate it. I would say if we break the projects up into the two distinct bodies of work, and let's focus specifically on the Office of School Leadership Project, we, through that work, should actually see significant shifts in the way school leaders and school leadership teams analyze data, support and coach teachers, ensure that their schools are functioning in service of instructional improvements for students, which should therefore increase instructional outcomes for kids across the district. The way that looks is that we will coach the EDSLs and the Chief of Innovation around common high leverage principal supervision practices. Those practices are best practices through research from the Wallace Foundation that speaks to how do you move instruction in scale in a school district. And the way to do that is to really increase capacity of the principal supervisors, because the principal supervisors have the greatest reach in the school districts, right? So as principal supervisors, we're going to align on some really high leverage practices like coaching our principals, data analysis, instructional leadership team development. We're going to norm on how we walk through schools, what we're looking for in terms of rigorous practices in classrooms with our principal supervisors, their instructional leadership teams. And their instructional leadership teams. We're going to build out scope and sequences or learning sequences for school leaders and network teams so that we're really saying, as a Hartford Public Schools district, what does it look like for our principals to be instructional leaders? What are our expectations around that? How do we help coach and support and develop them around those expectations? And of course, all of those practices will lead to better teaching and learning for kids. So that EDSL work is really intensive because we're going to spend a lot of time on site with the EDSLs, really helping to push their to norm their observation and feedback lens, as well as their coaching and development lens of their school leaders, as well as data analysis practices at their schools. So at the end of the year, we should be able to see a shift in the principal, when the principals say, have I been supported and developed by my EDSL this year? We should see a shift there. We should also see a shift in normed observation and rigorous practices in classrooms. That should be really, really clear. As far as the Central Office Innovations work, the conversation that we had in the teaching and learning meeting that we are sort of trying to thread, make sure there's a through line here, is that the central office should be operating in service of schools. And that means that all departments are thinking about first, what do our schools need in order to improve operation systems, facility systems, HR systems, talent systems, et cetera, so that schools and school leaders are free to do the work of instruction, right? That's the purpose of us all being here, that schools are safe and that kids are learning at high levels. And school leaders can't do that if there are a lot of operational practices or central office practices that are preventing them from really focusing on instruction. So our central office work will include some internal surveying and focus groups and analysis of some existing, lots of really good, juicy data that you guys have already done at Hartford, to then help define some key leverage moves for this short-term year, this 23-24 school year, and then longer-term moves with Paul and his team that would help to shift existing practices in the central office. What those practices are right now, we can't tell you, because the data analysis that we'll do, the focus group work that we'll do, the internal health surveys that we'll do, will help to tell us and the team what should be the next steps as a central office to really improve the work of serving schools. That will all of that research that we'll do, we will eventually bring back to cabinet. We'll hold several cabinet meetings to guide decision-making as a central office. We will also do professional development for managers in the central office and central office teams based on what the data tells us. So all of that work will ultimately lead to the cabinet making some decisions about shifts in central office teams, the work that they're doing, practices and systems, and will ultimately, we hope, through some internal surveying with the principals, we will see a shift in a question that we're asking, which is, how do you feel that central office is serving you? We're going to do an internal customer service survey earlier in the year. And our goal is, by the time that we do all of this internal capacity building in terms of cabinet meetings and training, et cetera, by the end of the year, that we will see some change. And when principals say, how is central office serving you, we'll see an increase in what perspective or feeling about central office supports between beginning of year and end of year. And then years to come, you will continue to see that shift in principal satisfaction or school satisfaction around central office supports.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Ms. Gordon, I totally like what you're saying. I think, and I agree with Dr. Smerling's explanation of this idea of qualitative value. Yeah, that should be brought to a committee like ours. So kind of before and after, you kind of alluded to it, what would be really helpful as you move forward is, let's get that before data. Like, it'd be great to see at the principal's level, what is it they don't know right now, or they can't get their hands on easy? And just thought a quick example, like with teachers have asked for more teacher or relevant practitioner evaluation in terms of the classroom. Somehow be great to see principals seen as more of an asset in evaluation, or somehow teachers feeling better supported by principals and their initiatives. Fine. If you can show before and after, and the principal saying, helpful data that I couldn't get before, wow, now I can really get it, now I can really see it, and now it's really useful to my staff, that would be really valuable as a before and after. The other part you mentioned, like, for instance, if I'm talking about just like, I'm thinking of a tech complaint that I've heard, right? At school level, you have centralized printers, but potentially teachers can't Bluetooth into printers. So let's say, for instance, I can't hit my classroom, have it printer and come out, me go pick it up nicely. And when they call central office, that's clunky, takes a while, the printer doesn't work the way people need to, so they didn't have to go to the printer to print in person. That's the kind of thing. If you guys come with 3 or 4 projects like that comes out of all that focus grouping of, we're going to fix this, we're going to fix this, we're going to fix this. And then we see at the end, something got implemented. And then I can see a teacher saying, oh yeah, now printing from my classroom is easy. I'm just using it just as an example. That would be super value added. So yeah, it's the stuff you're talking about. If we can get that along the journey and see before and afters, or the 3 projects you're going to do, I'm repeating myself, but that would be my feeling that, yeah, I'd be happy if I could see that.
Well, I think we'd be happy to. I mean, our goal is really that we are operating in service of HPS as a district, but our mission as an organization is to see shifts with students' experiences, really significant academic and social emotional shifts, right? And we know through all of our experience as school leaders in districts that when central office systems are clunky, it leads to stress for school leaders. And when school leaders are stressed or teachers are stressed, they don't do their best work for kids. So we're excited about this particular project because we are going to spend a lot of time in schools through the Office of School Leadership Support and get a really good feel for how the central office can best service schools from that lens. But also because we will have quite a few touch points with central office and do a lot of data analysis and research there, we'll be able to help with Paul and his team say, if we are going to prioritize shifts, what are the most high leverage shifts we can prioritize on the central office side to make sure that schools feel really, really good about how central office is working in service of them. And there will be some short-term shifts in the spring, ideally. And then again, this change takes time. So over the course of the next few years, you should really start to see the shifts take hold.
Thank you, Dr. Schmerling.
Thank you. I want to reiterate and just comment about, I think Mr. Walker's recommendation is tremendous. I wholeheartedly agree. I think having a baseline before we start so that we can see the impact of the interventions, potentially with different milestones, so we don't have to wait a whole year. If we're implementing some changes, maybe quarterly or even biannually, we can get updates. That would go a long way in streamlining this process when you're asking for additional funding next time. So thank you. Mr. Walker, great idea.
Thank you. I do not see any additional hands. Oh, wait a moment. Okay, and my board colleagues, please keep me true to this because I stayed at most of the retreat, but I had to leave near the end a little bit early. So this is an agenda item that's being presented at our regular meeting. It should not require a vote. Any other comments before we continue?
What do you mean it should not require a vote?
For today, that's what I'm asking.
This is Board Member Walker. Yes, I would agree with you. We're going to decide that this needs to be elevated, and right.
It would move to the reason just for the public to understand. We had a retreat where we were talking through our committee and our committee processes, and just making sure that we were all clear on expectations of when contracts do come up in front of us. And as we continue to streamline this process and just making sure that I'm just making an attempt to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence and making sure, again, because I had to leave a little bit early, that everyone's okay, that this will actually go to the regular meeting. We're not voting on this contract today. Again, I just want to make sure everyone's had an opportunity to ask any following questions, et cetera, because this is a decent sized contract, as was mentioned earlier.
Yes, I'll say, Kim, you didn't miss anything, but we did not get to how we're going to elevate to the board meeting. So I appreciate you making that point and, asking the board members here how we feel about elevating it, but we're not in all committees, we are not there yet, but I'm glad that we are here. We're doing it here.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I want to make sure that we are we're taking care of everyone's voice, and also obviously doing our due diligence that we do as board members and the work that we do reviewing this. So with that, we're going to move on from this agenda item and move on to, actually, I'm going to check in with Ms. Santiago first regarding the next contract to see if we're able to see Thank you so much for attending. Appreciate you being here and participating. If we are ready to go for our next contract, 1.02. Again, if you're just joining from the public, there was might have been a misunderstanding about who needed to be at this meeting this morning. So just want to make sure we were all set. So Christina?
Yes, I have not heard back from Chief Blackburg. And again, I will own the fact that I realized that I did not have cabinet on the invite. They are aware of having to attend finance, but I did not actually send the invite. So I will own that. We have Chief Foster could try his best to walk us through this. And we did present this in the Family and Community Engagement Committee as well.
Okay. All right. Well, if we think we can do it and we want it at the next, because the one thing, it does need to get through this committee before it goes to the regular board meeting. So I'm assuming, Mr. Foster, you want us to go ahead and give it a best shot, if you don't mind. All right. Feel free to take it away. Thank you.
Yes, good morning again. Thank you. So as you can see on the slide, we have the funding that is proposed. So this is an extension approval or extending these contracts. And this is for our community school partners. And so you can see the dollar figures, you can see the schools with our community school partners. And just to contextualize it, right? So this is part of our strategic priority 3. And in implementing an expanded community schools model has been part of that. And that involves summer, weekend, before and after school enrichment activities. You see the agencies here. One of the things I want to name is you see that column for the 25% decrease. So this funding has been coming through ESSER. And right, one of the things that was communicated throughout this process with our community schools partners is that we would need to slowly do some scale back of funding. Now we were able, originally what was communicated with partners is that for the 23-24 school year, we were going to have to scale back by 50%. So meaning the funding level for our partners from 22-23 to 23-24 was going to have to be scaled back by 50%. We were able, as we worked on the ESSER spending plan for 23-24, and as we were hearing from schools about the value of these enrichment activities and in the full school community model, we were able to make that only a 25% reduction. But it's just important to name it, right? Because with this being funded by ESSER, we all know that ESSER goes away a year from now. And so we have to be thoughtful and mindful of how these enrichment activities continue or in what way, shape, or form they continue after this year. But in terms of these specific contracts, they are for continuing our full school community partnership model with these partners in the schools that you see named here. And you know, some of the objectives, and I know this was talked about in the family and community engagement meeting, but or sorry, what I should say is just how do we assess this, right? So we have a site visit tool that's aligned to community school standards. And we look at the data and we identify opportunities for technical assistance for partners, and really just are focused on a continuous improvement model of, as we extend these contracts, how do we keep improving the services being provided? And obviously school leaders are part of those conversations. So that's the quick overview. And again, you can see the dollars on the screen, so I won't specifically go through all of the dollars, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions from my colleagues?
I have a question. Go.
Okay, well, let Mr. Walker go and then Ms. Brody.
Oh, I apologies. I've got a message that I have an image problem when I go off camera, but it's a comment and a question. This is a continuation contract, and Mr. Foster was accurate in saying that. I was at the Family Community Engagement Committee meeting, and I wanted to elevate the fact that there was an end of year contract summary with results. And so it wasn't provided to this committee. I'm just going to elevate that. One of the things that would be helpful, because it's a continuation, it would be helpful for the finance committee to get that kind of contract results kind of presentation, at least for our review, because it would make it easier to determine the impact of the different providers and what they did as we look to push this continuation forward. Kind of under Dr. Schmerling's idea of understanding the value. And so I'm just going to elevate sharing that with us. We can't do it right this second, but it'd be great to have that forwarded to us on this committee, maybe even to the board members themselves prior to the general board meeting. So we'll have kind of that information before we vote on the continuation.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I think point very well taken. And I noticed that Ms. Santiago did put a note in the chat. I think it is the same report broken out by CBO, and relating that it will be out in time for the regular meeting. But to the point you're making, in the future, those type of reports, we're able to see results and based on the investments made. If we can have that for the finance committee, I think that would be extremely helpful. Ms. Brody.
Thank you. I was hoping, referencing our retreat, that what we decided on before it even comes to the committee before here, right? That we would have seen the reason why we should, renew with the CBOs, all based on results. It was a cumulative type of report. I've expressed, and I'll express here, that I hope that we get that data before the regular meeting, and that the CBOs will be available to answer questions. I know in the past we did like everyone standing up there, and we ask a question and each CBO might answer, might not know. You have your funding that you're getting individually. This is not group funding. And you're able to answer questions as it relates to the results that you submitted to Hartford Public Schools. Because I'm assuming they submitted results, we just did not get them. But I'm hoping that the format is not like this, everyone standing at the mic taking everyone is we have one CBO that's getting over $1 million. So this isn't, a little bit of money. And I hope they're ready to, answer those questions once we get the results that we're currently waiting for.
Thank you, Ms. Brody. To your point, I agree. We did talk about, and I am giving, and this is just as chair in this moment, I'm giving some grace, but my expectations for our next meeting, just putting that out publicly, is that we talked about 8 or so points for contracts that we expect to be brought to us for the finance committee. We also today had a great conversation and discussion about the value and how can we see the value in performance, especially if someone is renewing. So I would like that to be in place for our next committee. But to the points being made here already, that information will be, I think, very important for our regular meeting that's coming up, because I'm a strong supporter of community schools, and I acknowledge at times it is difficult to show impact, which is actually one of the reasons it's so important to actually speak to impact and the reasons that we're making these investments. With that, Mr. Walker, back to you.
Thank you, Chair Oliver. I wanted to reiterate your point. The Family and Community Engagement Committee Chair, Escobar, made a similar point that she was going to meet with the different leadership team members over the next month to go over, I think, the 8 points you're talking about. So I think that grace is appropriate. And I would offer here that we're available, whether it be you, Chair Oliver, or one of the members, to sit down and talk with the leadership. So they'll hear from us directly what we need. And then by the next month, hopefully, like as you just suggested, the 8 points or whatnot will be there. So I think the grace is appropriate. And then hopefully we'll have a conversation over the next month to communicate.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Ms. Brody.
I do just want to add that these 8 points are not brand new. This is something that goes back years. So it's not like it's a new process. I'm all with the grace thing, but this is not a brand new thing we're asking for. This was a standard set years ago. So I just wanted to make that reference.
Agreed. As some of the, I was going to say oldest, but Ms. Birdie, I'm not going to say it that way. I'll say as most tenured folks on the board that I was there with you. Yes. I do have a question, Mr. Foster. You talked about the 50% decrease and then a 25% decrease and the reasoning for it. And I understand, especially from a sustainability perspective, usually when you're working with your partners, you want to have some plans that how do we handle this in the future collectively as ESSER dollars are going to go away. You mentioned also that based on the plan, you were able to shift the decrease from the 50% ESSER spending plan from 50% to 25%. I would like just to request a copy of the most recent ESSER spending plan. If it's not already been sent, I just think that would be helpful for us to see, because I will say here that we all, I think, agree we don't want to leave any dollars on the table at this moment. We have, one school year left basically to spend this money. And if it's a situation where we can get more dollars out the door, not just to get the dollars out the door, but to support our children and families. I'm a big supporter of us doing that. So I think just having that information would be helpful, knowing that the superintendent and cabinet and you are all working hard to try to get through that plan. So that's just a request I have.
Happy to provide that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you. So we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is 2.01, the 2022-2023 preliminary financial results unaudited. Mr. Foster, or it might be someone else actually on the team, because I see other team members though.
Well, I think it is me. And so good morning again. So I have 3 reports to share with you. These were all sent out to you, I believe, on Friday. And we're going to go just in order. So we have our preliminary 22-23 financial results. We have our July 2023, so the first month of the 23-24 fiscal results, and then also an update on the COVID relief grant spending. So very relevant to the what you were just sharing, Chair Oliver. So we're going to start with the 2022-2023. I just want to emphasize that at this time, the 2022-2023 results that I'm sharing with you are preliminary because they are not yet audited, right? So we just closed the year. The audit is really just getting underway, and so there can always be some modest adjustments as a consequence of the audit. But I will just give you the high level, and then I'm certainly happy to take questions. And I know our Executive Director of Financial Planning, Maureen Coleman, is on the call as well as we get into questions. Our total expenditures for the 22-23 year were $474.4 million. Of that, 296.4 were general fund expenditures. In the general fund, that was 12.4 million over budget. And I know that as Chief Penn was sharing our 22-23 over the course of the year, he was keeping you current on some of the causes of that, and certainly increases in transportation costs, increases in tuition costs, and increases in fringe benefit costs. Those were drivers of the general fund deficit. There was also, as previously shared with you, a shortfall in state revenues compared with the budget. So one example being having 300 fewer magnet students coming in from outside Hartford than was budgeted for, right? And so that just means dollars and revenue. And so those are the drivers of the 12.4 million. The good news is that $12.4 million deficit does not include the use of the 5.6 million in our non-lapsing account with the city, and a further 6.8 million that we have in a magnet school tuition offset grant. So that was something passed through the legislature to help offset some of our tuition costs. And so between those 2 items, we're able to achieve balance for the 22-23 year. So we will functionally end the 2022-2023 balanced thanks to the hard work of the finance team. And really, ultimately, the finance team was able to offset about 26 million in adverse developments. And what we mean by adverse developments is those things I talked about: transportation costs, fringe costs, but also declining revenue. And so over the course of the fiscal year, we were able to offset that 26 million and are able to end the year balanced with the use of the non-lapsing account and the Magnet tuition offset. If we move to the next report, sorry, and it's, you know, attached to each of these, right? You have the all funds budget for 22-23, you have the general fund, and you have the special fund. So you have the detail there relative to the lines. So if we go to the next report, it's just the July 2023. So this is now we're into the 23-24 fiscal year. And as not uncommon, July was a relatively quiet month. $5.1 million were expended. That's primarily salary and fringe benefits for both 12-month employees and those working in the summer. We also had 13.6 million in encumbrances. That's, you know, very common in July. It's utilities, annual maintenance and service contracts coming due with the sort of turnover into the new fiscal year on July 1. And so that's where we are as of July. So again, 5.1 million expended, 13.6 million encumbered. And then again, you have the attachments to that. And I'm just going to go to the COVID, and then we can certainly circle back to any of these three reports for questions. So in terms of COVID relief grant spending, we encumbered another 10.6 million in the month of June. So out of the 154.6 million total across the three buckets of money relative to COVID relief grants, we've now spent 93.9 million of that funding. That leaves us with about $60.7 million remaining. And so that goes to the conversation we just had about the ESSER spending plan. One of the things that we were able to do is consistent with the funding guidelines. We were able to shift a number of expenses that had been booked originally to the ARP ESSER 3 grant over to the ESSER 2, because ESSER 2, as we've talked about, that expires in about 20 days. So that expires on the 30th, 9/30/2023. But as you can see, we only have about $600,000 remaining in ESSER 2, and that will be fully expended by the September 30th deadline. So we are going to be, you know, to the point about not returning funds. We are certainly on track for that. So you see that the vast majority of our remaining COVID relief grant funding is the 60 million that's in the ARP ESSER 3, which sunsets on September 30th, 2024. And as already said, we will certainly share with you the current ESSER spending plan. We have that. We have a plan for that full 60 million, and we have a plan to have the ESSER funding fully spent actually by June 30th of 2024. And I think we had shared this with you in early August when we shared the ESSER spending plan. But we have a couple timelines we've built in, so we're sweep timelines, and so we have positions that are funded with ESSER. And any positions that are funded with ESSER that remain vacant by October 15th, we will pull that money back and reallocate it so as to, again, make sure we're spending the full amount of the funding by the end of the grant. And on December 15th, we will do the same thing with non-position funding on the ESSER 3 ARPA grant. If it's not encumbered by December 15th, we will pull it back. And we already have identified additional investments that could be made that would be impactful for our students should money come back that isn't allocated in the way that the spending plan currently has it being allocated. So again, we have about 60.7 million remaining, and we are very much on track to have that expended by June 30th, 2024. And I'm happy to open it up for questions, if Chair Aller, if that's, I mean, that's really that's the high level report. Again, you do have all the detail. I'm happy to speak to any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Brody.
Thank you. Trying to absorb the numbers, but I thought we asked for at one point in time a more detailed report than this one that's on the screen now, as far as the ESSER funding. And I don't know if that request got lost with the last our last CFO leaving.
Oh.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mr. Foster, will the ESSER plan that you're going to send out help to unpack this a bit? In other words, would that get to perhaps that report?
Yeah, it does have certainly more detail in terms of what are we spending certain things on, but if you actually scroll down, right, attached to this memo is the line item detail of the ESSER spending. So the next page is ESSER 1, right? So that's fully expended. The page after that is ESSER 2, which is, again, it's mostly expended and will be fully expended by the end of this month. And then the final page of the report is the ARP ESSER 3. So I'm not aware of, I'm certainly happy to talk about it. I'm not aware of a request for further detail than at this level of the line items, but there may well have been a conversation. I'm just not aware of it.
Ms. Brody, I see your hand back up. And I also see Ms. Santiago with the basically a format request with asking to add a change from column.
Yes, I remember, I think per Ms. Brody's request, we, which made sense. You wanted to know what the difference was from the last month's financial report. And I do recall adding that, but I'm not sure if that's what you meant, Ms. Brody, or you meant more detail, or if what Ms. Chief Foster just said satisfies that question.
It was geared around the funding that has not been spent yet, for us to have a understanding for the plans for that. That was a part of it.
So I'm thinking that Mr. Foster will send out to us via Ms. Santiago the ESSER spending plan, the most updated one. And then what I would ask all of us to do is, if that's not answering the questions, that we respond to that. Because it sounds as if that plan is already created, ready to go. It's just a matter of sharing it with board members now that we've made that official request. Is that fair, Mr. Foster?
Yeah, and we did share a plan right in early August, I believe at the committee of the whole. And so I can certainly share that out. But what I would say is, if that's not the detail you're looking for, just let us know.
Through you, Madam Chair, does the plan line up with the funds? Like, you will it make sense to us for the amount remaining?
Chair, do you want me to speak to that? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so yes, and I mean, so what we shared in August, obviously money has been spent since early August and now, and so I can try to figure out how to make sure we can kind of line it up with the 60 million that you're seeing in this report, right? Because that's always a moving target, right? New encumbrances are happening every day, and particularly because we have positions at ESSER, right? Every time there's a payroll that gets paid out, right, the total amount of ESSER remaining goes down. So I think I understand your ask, as you want to be able to see the connection between what are the total dollars remaining and how is the plan to spend that. And so we can try to do that. I just want to be upfront that it's very much a moving target.
No, that's fine. It'll be accurate as the point and time that the report was given. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Chair Oliver. Based on this conversation, I just want to weigh in quickly. I think that Chairman Rigger had, at the retreat or right before then, made a request to get the latest and greatest on ESSER funding, because I think he wanted to make sure that we were timely as a board and as a district making decisions about spending remaining money in the time period allotted. And I don't know then, Mr. Foster, if that drives a different kind of reporting, but I know he wanted some kind of report structure that it would be actionable. In his case, I think he wanted to understand how much is left that's unencumbered. If it's encumbered, then to a certain degree, we already have a plan to spend it. I think it'd be great to understand moving forward, here's encumbered, maybe the plan for it, here's what's unencumbered, and we need a decision on this money, and we need it by a certain date. That would actually be at least actionable on a part of the board. This second comment from me is, I floated the idea, Mr. Foster, of spending some of the time in the Finance Committee going through kind of the board, how the budget is built up, In the past, we've had like that 2-month period where Chief Penn would run through all the line items and we try to digest it kind of fire hose style. And I thought, since we have these monthly meetings, that we could dedicate some time monthly to going through chunks of the budget line item, so that maybe we could hear from departments and to a certain degree how they're funded and understand their mission. We kind of understand, also help to understand to a certain degree what the bodies are used for, certain department, people, mission, what they do, how they're funded. And so when we get to the annual budgetary process, we'd already have some insight, some information. And so it's less of a fire hose and more of a collaborative process going through the year, understanding how the budget is built up section by section. That be my recommendation. I mean, I'm anticipating that I need to talk to you or whoever is going to be the permanent CFO kind of offline to kind of build up what that would look like and how to chunk it and how many meetings would it take to kind of constructively go through this.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Just to that point, I think what's really important is, and Dr. Schmerling, I see your hand, we'll get right to you in a moment, is that when we agreed as a board to accept, or I should say to vote on, to have the date that we vote on the budget to be earlier in the year, that meant that shrunk down the amount of time that we as a board have to review the actual proposed budget. So to that point, acknowledging that there's definitely a process. I know that it's likely already starting. I know in October things start getting, and usually we go through this calendar, but to Mr. Walker's point, we used to have a longer amount of time to really ingest it. And this is before Mr. Walker, even your time on the board. And now it's very, very short and it's a lot of information very quickly. So I really appreciate the comment and suggestion. And think I just wanted to give a little bit of that context because especially if there are new items or things are being moved, it's a lot to take in. So knowing that the schools won't be ready yet, like there is a process, for the schools and the SGCs and all of that, but just how is it that we can get proactively work towards that budget and making sure we're understanding as much as we can as possible, as soon as possible, I think is a really great suggestion. Unless you want to say anything, Paul, I'm going to go to Dr. Schmerling. Yeah. Okay.
I can just say, yeah, I mean, I think we do need, particularly because of the ESSER wind down, we're going to need more engagement across the board with this year's budget process. And it is the plan that, I'll defer to you as the chair of the committee in terms of, how you want to use this time, but certainly we would want to start at the October Finance Committee meeting, talking about the timeline and the ways in which we want to engage around the budget.
That works for me, and I am more than okay with Mr. Walker or any of our board members wanting to be having ideas. I think more ideas the better, and for us to figure out ways we do continuous improvement for the board in terms of the budget and the budget development process and approval process. So thank you. Appreciate your openness to that. Dr. Schmerling.
Thank you, Ms. Oliver. I've got two questions. First, in regard to the timing, I'm wondering if it would be possible to provide some in-service education for the board on the budget that's sort of extracurricular outside of the Finance Committee, since our time is limited with the agendas, to offer on a voluntary basis some in-service opportunities to have that kind of support to understand the budget so we can be better informed. And then it's up to us, to make the time, but that might be something to think about. Secondly, and I don't want to complicate this any more than it is, but Mr. Foster, tell me if I'm correct, that I'm assuming that in the encumbrances going forward, it includes outsourced contracts that we'll be reviewing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes. So for
That
example,
$60 million?
the attuned contract that we looked at today, the 239,000 in that contract is part of the encumbrances. Yes.
Right. And I think given the scrutiny that we want to give to these contracts, in the event one of these contracts does not get approved, I'm wondering if we should have Plan B. There's a lot of unfunded needs in the school system, and if for whatever reason we say this is not a contract we want to continue to support, rather than scrambling to say, well, how do we spend these dollars down, to have sort of a backup plan in the event a contract does not get approved, what would be the next thing on the list? So that when we're looking over the course of the year and that $60 million, there's some additional options that can be considered. It might be kind of presumptuous to assume that we're going to approve every single contract. It may well happen. That's been our history, but I think given the degree of scrutiny we want to give these going forward, it might be a dangerous assumption. So just to be prepared, just in case.
Great points, Dr. Schmerling. Thank you. And really love the in-service idea. So I can have a longer concentrated time, focused time on budget. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Ms. Santiago, did you receive any emails or for anything for public comment?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. No, I have not.
So again, we are still working through this process. We want to give an opportunity for public comment at our committee meetings. I am very much very supportive of us being able to do that, and we will smooth out that process and make sure we get that information out to people earlier than in the meeting itself as we move forward. So if people do have public comment they would like to share at the committee meetings, are able to do that. With that, we've come to the end of our meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, this morning, early Monday morning. And you can see I'm in DC and it worked itself out. So I appreciate everyone being here and everyone's ongoing support and service to our children and families in Hartford. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.